So, hello everyone. I'm based at the Faculty of Divinity, University of Cambridge, where, in accordance with my job description, I research and give lectures on various social religious aspects of Hinduism. At the same time, for various reasons over the last 3 decades, I have also been studying aspects of Hindu Muslim and Hindu Christian relations. In particular, I have been exploring certain resonances between Islamic mysticism and Hindu visions of devotional love of God or bhakti. This is a huge topic. We can go on and on for many days and many nights. Since I only have around 40 minutes, this is what I propose to do. I will begin by discussing some concepts and experiences that are associated with bhakti in the first half of this talk. I will then move in the second half to an exploration of how these concepts and experiences of bhakti have sometimes been resituated in Indo-Islamic visions of the Hindu self and the divine reality. So to begin with the word bhakti itself, the Sanskrit word bhakti has multiple meanings. Depending on the context, it can variously mean those things: steadfast devotion, wholehearted commitment, joyful service, meditative attention, and loving attachment. So bhakti encompasses the entire human psychosomatic sensorium, that is to say, our bodies, our minds, our hearts. One thinks bhakti, one hears bhakti, one smells bhakti, one feels bhakti, and one tastes bhakti. And this way of thinking and living has been developed in various texts in Sanskrit and in various vernaculars such as Gujarati, Tamil, Bengali, Marathi, and Hindi. One encounters bhakti in diverse contexts of Hindu living as an attitude of dedication to an icon or murti of the divine reality placed inside a massive temple or a small household shrine, or as an expression of joyfulness in congregational singing or seasonal festivals of a deity, or as the animating force on pilgrimages to sacred sites, and so on and so on. So let's begin with one basic question. What is it that theologians do? Well, theologians do many different things, but here is a basic question that they ask. How do we talk about God? So we know that God by definition is not a finite object, so I cannot meaningfully write a sentence of this type: God is a lecturer from Cambridge. Indeed, it seems that I can never complete a sentence of the type God is ... Whatever predicate I put into that sentence will make God into a finite object. So let's look at 3 ways in which Hindu theologians, philosophers grapple with this conceptual problem. The first way says multiply as many descriptions as possible for completing this sentence. In Hinduism, sometimes the divine reality is represented as feminine. In one famous hymn, the goddess Devi is said to have 1,000 names. In principle, there is no reason why the number has to stop at 1,000. If you have enough time and energy, you can increase this number to 5 billion or 5 trillion or 5 billion multiplied by 5 trillion. The second says God is so utterly ineffable, so completely unknowable, indescribable, that this sentence can never be completed. The sentence being God is ... So if you want to talk about God, there is only one way to talk about God, which is paradoxically by saying nothing. And the third way, the way that we will discuss today, we find it in many styles of bhakti, and it says take one particular name and treat it as an analogy, treat it as a symbol, treat it as a metaphor, as a signifier. And this third way has many different forms in many different forms of Hinduism, but I will consider one main form that is centered around the idea of devotional love of God, that is bhakti. And here the central claim is that God, in this case Krishna, is supremely beautiful, so bewitchingly beautiful that just by looking at this sacred image of God would make your heart gravitationally pulled away to God, pulled from all your worries and all your transactions that go on in the world around you, and will pull your heart away from the world towards the beautiful Lord. So why do we need to speak in this way of symbolism or metaphor or of analogy? And the answer is that God's love for me and my love for God is not like my love for my friend, which is subject to variation with time and space. So the word bhakti that we are here translating as love has a somewhat wider connotation than our idea of love that may be shaped by Hollywood or Bollywood movies. By love, we may mean romantic love and just that, but bhakti, while it does include romantic love, has a much wider spectrum of meaning. Think of bhakti as a cosmic power that draws human beings to their true source, namely God. And here is one example which will hopefully make the point. Let's say my beloved or your beloved is in New Zealand. And let's say you receive an email saying that your beloved is ill. What would you do? I hope you will do this. You will walk out of this room, buy a ticket, go to Heathrow and fly to New Zealand right now. You will walk out of this room. And what would that show? That love is a cosmic power that makes the world go round. Now, those of you, I suppose all of you who are familiar with the Islamic idioms bila kaifa, tasbihi, and tanzihi will hear some echoes in what I'm saying. So by bhakti, we mean the unswerving devotional love that the human self, the term is Atman, should cultivate towards the divine reality. The Sanskrit term is Brahman, who in this case is Krishna, who is, to repeat, the supremely, bewitchingly beautiful divine reality. So why should Atman cultivate such unswerving devotional love towards Brahman? In many traditions of Hindu Bhakti, the answer, generally speaking, is because Atman is existentially dependent on Brahman. So let's try to make sense of that phrase, existentially dependent. Suppose you are financially dependent on your sister. That may be one good reason to have a lot of love for your sister. Because if you need pocket money to go to Brighton, you can send her an email, and because you love her and she loves you, she will do the bank transfer. But suppose in a different universe, your very existence at every moment in time, every breath you take, is because of your sister. Would not the power of your love for your sister become magnified 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, 1,000,000,000,000 times? So this is one reason why bhakti forms of Hinduism often use the language of devotional intimacy when talking about God. Suppose your lover asks you, how much do you love me? And you say, my love for you is as high as 8,848 meters. They may not be quite impressed with that remark. However, if you were to say, my love for you is so deep that I'm not able to measure those depths, so deeply intertwined you are with the very fabric of my being, that is a very different language game. When we speak of love, metaphors of height that somehow generate these images of majesty and grandeur are not as suitable as metaphors of depth that somehow evoke presence, co-presence, and devotional intimacy. Now, according to Hindu Bhakti traditions, this is because Brahman, who in this case is Krishna, is not somewhere out there on the top of Mount Everest, the height of which is 8,814 meters. Rather, Brahman is right here in the depths of your Atman. To say that God is with you does not mean that God stops being God and loses God's sovereignty. We find this conceptual intertwining of God's cosmic power and God's intimate presence in a text called the Narada Bhakti Sutras, which gives you a range of meanings and experiences of bhakti. In Hinduism, generally speaking, the more the merrier. If you can do it with many, don't stop at one. Let's have more. So here's a full spectrum of 11 such meanings of bhakti. Now, I'm not going to read out the whole of that for you, but if you look at 1, 2, 3, and 5, you will sense the emphasis on worshiping God, on revering God, on praising God, on lauding God, God the majestic one, God the King, God the Supreme Lord. Here, God is the God who is above you, who is somehow controlling you, ruling over you. But if you look at 7 and 8, you will sense the emphasis on God who is with you, God who is in you, God who is beside you, God who is next to you. In particular, at number 7, God even seems to need your love. Suppose you seek to cultivate bhakti of the seventh type, bhakti of parental affection towards Krishna as an infant. Now consider the difference between cultivating bhakti towards your sister when she is a little baby and when she is 45 years old. In the latter case, when she is 45 years old, your bhakti towards your sister may be filled with transactional expectations such as, if I love my sister, she will think well of me. In that case, the next time I need some pocket money to go to Brighton, I will email her and she will do a bank transfer in 15 minutes. But you cannot possibly harbor such expectations when you love your little baby sister, because you know that your baby sister cannot solve your problems, whatever they may be. So the central claim in bhakti of the seventh type is that it is much easier to cultivate selfless love by loving a baby than by loving a human being who's 45 years old. Thus, in some Hindu temples, you will find Hindu women standing in long queues with various types of food offerings, which are given to the particular icon of the baby or of the infant Krishna, who is said to be present there. And this style of bhakti is highlighted in a famous narrative from a 10th century text called the Bhagavata Purana, where foster mother Yashodā tells her infant Krishna that his playmates have complained that he has eaten some earth, and is struck with awe and bewilderment when, on peering into his tiny mouth, she sees multiple universes enfolded into its finitude. What does she see? Yashoda sees entities such as the sky, the moon, the stars, the fire, the planets, and so on, and most importantly, herself. So she looks into the mouth of her infant and she sees herself replicated in those vast cosmic spaces, which are somehow mystically contained in the tiny mouth of an infant. Bewildered and completely astounded, she decides to surrender herself at his feet, regarding her as her cosmic lord, when Krishna, through his cosmic power, makes her mother forget this awe-inspiring vision so that she again takes her infant on her lap with maternal affection. And so that's bhakti of the seventh kind, bhakti towards God, who is your supreme Lord, and yet with whom you can have this devotional communion. Perhaps the most intriguing type of bhakti, at least in my estimate, is bhakti of the 11th type, the bhakti of the deepest separation. So the claim here is that when God has deserted you, seemingly God has disappeared from your life, the pain and the agony that you would experience has a spiritual power to purify you, to refine you. So the seeming absence of God has the power to purify us on our spiritual path. Let's see how this idea works by returning to the example of the sister. If my sister lives in the same house as I do, she may very well become invisible to me because she's just one more person whom I see day in and day out. And let's say one weekend she flies to somewhere on the Eastern Hemisphere. Until she lands and sends me a text message, all I do is fret and repeatedly ask myself, has she reached? Has she reached? Has she reached? And I keep on checking my phone every 5 seconds or 5 minutes. That's to say, it is precisely when my sister is seemingly absent from me that her absence becomes a form of hyperpresence. And that is said to be a metaphor for how the seeming absence of God can have greater power to fill you with love of God than the presence of God. If God somehow started living with you as your best friend, you may even forget to notice God. God is just like the laptop on the table. However, let's say that your love for God has reached such a deep intensity that when you feel that God has disappeared, even for 5 seconds, you will feel this pain of separation as unbearably painful that goes on for 5 million of years. And this theme is developed in the Bhagavata Purana through the paradigmatic narrative of Krishna and the cowherd women, the gopi. This is a very important narrative in Hinduism, which has been reworked in literature, in poetry, in architecture, in theater, and Bollywood music. So one beautiful evening in autumn, when the charming full moon has risen in the sky, Krishna begins to play on his world-entrancing flute. So mesmerizing are the notes of the flute that the cowherd women who are on who are not on this side of the river, they hear the flute call and they leave behind their domestic chores and run to the middle of the forest to be with Krishna. So then we are told by the narrative that some of these gopis, the cowherd women, they become filled with pride in thinking that they own Krishna, that they possess Krishna, that they control Krishna. And suddenly Krishna disappears, plunging them into grief. And racked with pain, filled with this misery, they begin to look for Krishna in the sky, in the forests, everywhere. And this painful quest, where they discern signs of Krishna's absence everywhere, is followed by their reunion with Krishna and their joyful rejoicing in the circular dance. So right at the heart of the spirals of presence and absence, absence of presence, is what is called the pain of separation, or viraha, from the divine. And in the case of the supreme devotees of Krishna, the more they feel Krishna's presence, the more they feel Krishna is absent. And the more they are torn apart by this pain of Krishna's absence, the deeper they can move into the hidden radiance of Krishna's presence. So what Krishna is doing here, according to theologians who work on this narrative, is that Krishna is engaged in a spiraling dance of absence in presence, of presence in absence. So in moments of presence, he makes his devotees, the gopis, consciously aware of his divine infinity, which they cannot grasp, so that they are plunged into the pain, into the dark night of the soul, if you wish. Now, while the language used in these Hindu Bhakti contexts in Sanskrit is quite distinctive to these Hindu milieus, at their heart lies a simple idea, which in my estimate is quite easy to translate across cultural and religious borderlines. The simple idea is this, that whatever labor you may take up for the sake of your beloved is not labor for you. As it so happens, political history is not one of my favorite subjects. So if you ask me to write an essay on the Wars of the Roses, I will try to put off writing the essay for as long as I can. And yet, when my sister is in hospital, I readily spend 5 weeks at her bedside, sometimes not sleeping at all. So why is it the case that I feel that the process of writing an essay on political history is extremely laborious and painful, and yet I do not even realize that I have spent many sleepless nights at my sister's bedside? And this relatively common experience is what theologians of Hindu Bhakti are trying to work with when they say that if, a very big if you can somehow love God, that love becomes the most spontaneous labor that you will ever undertake. Now I'm going to present 2 songs which highlight the paradox that it is through the seeming absence of God that we begin to sense the mysterious presence of God. And the first song is from a figure called Madhav Deva, and the second from Rabindranath Tagore. And both these songs, one from Bengali and one from a language called Braj Bhasha, they talk about a deep-seated restlessness in the seeming absence of God. So if you are a true devotee like these gopis, when you feel that God is absent for 5 seconds, let alone 5 hours or 5 days, you will feel this yearning, this longing, this restlessness. You cannot do your emails anymore. You cannot give a talk like this anymore. You cannot be worried about, will I eat pizza or something else for dinner? You cannot worry about what should I wear to the party tomorrow. This restlessness will drive you crazy, this kind of craziness for the sake of love of God. And this deep-seated restlessness is what you will hear in these 2 songs. My friend, how do I express my grief to you? Not beholding that moon-faced one, which is a symbolic allusion to Krishna. My soul is withering away. My very life is disappearing. Oh Krishna, you are the embodiment of virtues. Through a cruel twist of my fate, I have lost you. In the absence of Krishna, my very life is slipping away from my fingers, and my heart yearns, longs to call out, Ah, Shyam. In the absence of Shyam, my whole life is a tissue of vanity. And this blazing viraha, so that's the magic word, it recurs through vast bodies of Hindu symbolic poetry, that between us and the divine lover, the divine beloved, is this painful night of viraha. And we yearn for the union, we yearn for the reunion. And the blazing fire of separation burns away in my heart. And in this great despair, Madhava is the composer. He says, my refuge is at the feet of the Lord. And the second song is from a figure from our own times, the Nobel laureate poet of Bengal, Rabindranath Tagore. He says, I am eager to speak of the matter of my heart, but there is none who would listen to me. The one to whom I surrendered, body, mind, heart, did not return. Does he wait on me? Does he sing songs of Viraha? Hearing his flute call, I once gave up my own home. So what's interesting about these two poems, as you can see, this song and this song are both reworkings of this archetype, but the first one mentions Krishna by name, and the second one does not. If I did not give you this poem in the light of this, you may not even realize that flute call is meant to be a symbolic allusion to the flute call of the divine Lord. Now, in the second part of this talk, I will now highlight how some Muslim poets in pre-modern India have taken this scriptural motive in speaking of their separation from God. And they usually, like this song, do not use the name Krishna in their songs, but they employ various types of symbolisms that can be made sense of in the light of this Krishna Gopi narrative. So the Sanskrit terms that are used when Hindus write on this narrative are Viraha and Milana, and the Muslim or the Perso-Arabic parallels are Firak and Visal. And that's what we will see now, how they use this language of Firak and Visal. Now, for many years, in many decades, I've been studying patterns of Hindu-Muslim relations in this region of India called Bengal, also Bangladesh today, and parts of northwestern India. On the one hand, there are various forms of cultural and linguistic affiliation across Hindu and Muslim social contexts. On the other hand, there are also deep fault lines shaped by socioeconomic asymmetry and cultural hierarchy. So in this book I published some years ago, I argue that across the last 5 or 6 centuries, Hindu-Muslim relations in South Asia have been modulated by a spectrum of intellectual, socioeconomic, and political factors. Various patterns of friendship and hostility have been generated at dynamic intersections between Hindu and Muslim representations of one another and shifts across socioeconomic contexts. So the popular characterization of relations between Hindus and Muslims in terms of an unmitigated hostility or that of an undiluted peace is historically inaccurate, for these relations have been formed by a shifting array of socio-economic and socio-political variables. Now, across many Muslim visions in South Asia, there are two strands which are sometimes sharply opposed to each other and sometimes coexist in a tension in the same text, in the same tradition or same teacher. The first is what I refer to here as the anxiety of influence. So this is a deep worry that some type of engagement with Hindu cultures will result in a departure from the narrow and straight path of truth. And the second is what I refer to here as the will to hospitality. This is the confident stance that such a type of engagement with Hinduism or South Asian spirituality is precisely an expression of commitment to this narrow and straight path of truth. And again, across Hindu visions, there are two strands which are sometimes sharply opposed to each other and sometimes coexist in an uneasy tension in the same text, tradition, or teacher. And the first is what I refer to as a vision of austerity, and the second one is a vision of abundance. So in the first vision, namely the vision you see on the right-hand side, the claim is that certain codifications of the Hindu dharma, and I'll tell you more about dharma, characterize the non-Indic outsider as a hostile enemy or a resident alien. And so here is a 2nd century Sanskrit text called the Manusmriti, which declares the range of the spotted antelope is the land fit for sacrifice or yajna. Beyond that is the land of the mleccha, that is to say the foreigner with whom people of dharma should not have any social exchanges. And the second is the vision of abundance, which I showed you there. The claim is that the Hindu Dharma, which is not completely codifiable in a set of rules and regulations, is said to be the universal umbrella that somehow encompasses the whole world under a spiritual canopy. Thus, the motto of a certain university established by Rabindranath Tagore, I think you cannot see the image there, which is fine, declares where the world makes a home in a single nest. Now, in an ideal world, this is what should happen. A Hindu vision of abundance would live happily alongside a Muslim will to hospitality. But in the real world that we live in, a Hindu vision of austerity has often collided with a Muslim anxiety of influence. So why is it that Hindus and Muslims alternately speak the language of anxiety or abundance, or the language of hospitality and anxiety? More specifically, why is it that some Hindus speak with the Manusmriti's language of prohibition, and some other Hindus speak with the language of Rabindranath Tagore's warm reception? And here's one relatively straightforward answer to a very complex question. We are shaped by a range of variables such as our psychological temperament, our childhood upbringing, our sociocultural location, and so on. So, with this complex backdrop in mind, what may we do to start or reinforce forms of dialogical outreach across Hindu and Muslim borderlines? To begin with, we face a daunting challenge, the burden of history filled with numerous incidents of hostility or antagonism, where these incidents have been expressions of long-range structures of material inequality. Human history is the complex narrative of how mortal beings compete for scarce resources, where this competition is shaped by the language of insider and outsider. Depending on what type of language is being invoked, region, nation state, caste, class, race, or religion, we can find ourselves on the wrong side, or if we are lucky, on the right side of a divide. In the light of this problem, let us explore some dimensions of the social-religious landscapes of North India in the 13th century. So here's the term dharma I was using. Central to many forms of Hindu religious imagination and social structure is the polyvalent term dharma, which, like the Greek word logos and the Arabic word din, defies translation. From a cosmic perspective, dharma is the cement of the universe. The reason why the sky is not falling on my head right now is because the sky has a dharma-grained structure. From a socio-moral perspective, dharma is the engine that shapes everything related to what I think, what I eat, where I live, what I do not eat. And around the turn of the first millennium, this motive of dharma was codified by Sanskrit-speaking Brahmins who prescribed specific duties for women, Sri dharma, and for different individuals belonging to social groups called Varna. And crucially, these codifications of Dharma Shastra speak to the group called Mlecha or Yavana, who are not capable of undertaking this cosmos regenerating Dharma. So let's look at what the situation would have looked like in. Sorry, I think there's one slide that is missing there. I don't know why, but okay. So just going to jump to this time frame, 1615. So what would the landscape of Delhi have looked like around 400 years ago, around 300 years ago, when all this was happening, when we find Muslim groups gradually migrating to North India? And by Muslim groups, I mean writers, poets, soldiers, and settlers who are migrating to North India. And one such very important figure that today we might refer to as an interfaith pioneer was this Muslim prince Dārā Shukōh, who was born in the state of Rajasthan. Today's terminology, the city has the tomb on the Dargah of the Sufi master Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti. And Shukōh felt inspired to boldly declare that good explanations of the Quran could be found in the Sanskrit Upanishads. Now, a recurring Islamic critique of Hindu life world is that it is deeply shaped by polytheism. However, when Dara was plumbing the depths of the Sanskrit Upanishads, he came up with statements such as these ones. In the beginning, this was simply what is existent, one alone, one only without a second. And the following discourse from the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad would have resonated with Dāra's quest. So here's a dialogue from the Upanishads. Shakalya asked him, how many gods or devas are there? So you start with this massive number, 3,006. And he carries on. He is not persuaded or convinced. How many gods are there really? So comes down to 33, comes down to 6, and then comes down to 1.5, which I've always thought is meant to be a joke. Like, think, okay, can you divide God like that? 1.5? Yes, said he, but really, how many gods are there? He finally concludes with one. And this statement that the one imperishable God or Brahman is this absolute unity, while the many different minor deities are multiple, receive some distinctive formulations across the vast array of Hindu beliefs and practices. Now, a generation before Dāra, we find a figure called Ras Khān or Sayyid Ibrahim Khan, who had walked down a similar pathway that would become a vitally osmotic site of synthetic borrowings across some of these Sanskritic and Perso-Arabic milieus, the language of self-effacing love, so prem, bhakti, ishq, mahabba. Now, while little is known about this life, we know from the couplets or dohas that he wrote that he was deeply immersed in the Sanskritic narrative of Krishna and the gopis. So that particular narrative I showed you a while ago is what is being discussed here. So figures such as Ras Khān recognized that this bhakti-shaped vision was malleable for Sufi or Taṣawwuf recalibration. And why is that so? Let me come to this. Yes. So some of the standard Sufi motifs of the painful surgery of the world-immersed self, the symbolic exile from the divine, who is our true home, and the practice of constantly recalling dhikr or zikr of the 99 names of our gracious host were housed across Hindustan by reimagining that narrative I gave you. So the one who is completely destitute, or fakir, devotee, lives in God. And these are some of the ideas you find in the Sufi cosmologies of this Sufi saints of the Kshatriya order, Mir Said Manjan. In that poem, Madhumalati, love, or Sanskrit prema, is presented as the cosmic glue through which the tissues of Wahadat al-Wujud are threaded together. And the narrative is set as a circle of love within which the hero Manohar meets the heroine Madhumalati at night, gets separated, and painfully works his way back to the heroine Madhumalati through various halting stages or stations. So Manohar and Madhumalati become the relishers of the sentiment, zok, of prema, such that the wayfarer, the salik, is the lover, asik, who sees in their love for the human beloved a reflection of their love for the divine beloved. So what we see here in a poem such as this one is that the worldviews of Taṣawwuf and Bhakti, which are shaped by this metaphor of love, what applies to the human beloved is a disworldly expression of what is perfectly expressed by the divine beloved. And this synthesis of Bhakti and Taṣawwuf spread across Indic terrains, and by the 17th or the 18th century, some Muslim poets were singing songs of Krishna without naming Krishna, but by using this language. So in a Middle Bengali reworking of the Persian narrative Majnun Layla, a figure called Daulat Uzair Bahram Khan is infusing the Perso-Arabic language of veiling, of confusion, of mahabba with the Sanskrit language of Viraha. So this poem is in Bengali, and there's a Muslim poet who is writing this, but look at the language he's using of Viraha. So instead of saying using language like Firak and Visal, he's using the local language. It is the language of Viraha that the gopis feel with respect to Krishna, but in this case, it's of course with respect to the Pir or the Murshid or God. So Layli says, the fire in my mind is burning away without respite. I've lost all of this. In solitariness, I remain enclosed in Viraha. And sometime during the 18th century, we don't quite know when to date this poem, we hear the lament of a Muslim poet as he too is singing of Krishna, but not named as Krishna, but is hinted at with some stock allusions. Without my friend, I waste away day and night. I cannot restrain myself. Tell me my girlfriend, so that gopi, What do I do now? Without my friend, with a capital F, that is, without my friend, my life has no companion. I keep waiting day and night, every day for my friend. In that waiting, I go floating on sorrow. If I were to find my friend, I would hold on to his feet. Irfan says, my friend is the flute player. By playing on that enchanting flute, he stole my heart away. So why do I say this has been written by a Muslim poet? Because of the name Irfan. So if you look at this poem and I were to remove that word Irfan and change the name and make it something else, and I say, has a Hindu composed this poem or a Muslim composed this poem, you may not know what to say. So in such pre-modern songs, it is only in the what is called the signature line, the line where the writer or the poet signs their name, that the poet is revealed as an individual from a Muslim milieu who is lamenting their sorrow in separation or exile from their friend who is the divine beloved. And this stream of sonic theology, Hindu as well as Indo-Islamic, continues to flow through various parts of North India and Bengal, that is including Bangladesh. And as I move to a conclusion, I shall let the national poet of Bangladesh, Kazi Nazrul Islam, have the last word. Kazi Nazrul Islam inherited some of these theological idioms configured by figures such as Ras Khān, and his social-religious visions do not allow any straightforwardly modular characterization as either Hindu or Muslim. For instance, he composed songs both about the Prophet Muhammad and the Hindu goddess Devi. And here is a poem from the national poet of Bangladesh. Oh girlfriend, in your youth dress up as a yogi, go looking for Krishna in forest after forest, hearing his flute call, give up all your concerns about family honor, keep searching for him along the pathways. Let me conclude on a sociological note. Sometimes this question is put to me, how can the study of the past help us in negotiating the complexities of interreligious relations in South Asia today? So as I've tried to show today, the simple answer is that the past is never past, it is still flowing past us. So in the study of Hindu-Muslim interactions, it is vital to move beyond two poles of this continuum. The first is what I've called here demonization, and the second is romanticization. So the first one says that the non-Hindu other, Muslim or Christian, is fundamentally incapable of speaking in local languages of South Asia and is doomed to remain a sociocultural outsider. And this claim is historically incorrect, as I've tried to show in the limited time that I have today here. The second goes to the diametrically opposite extreme. It represents some of these spaces of poetic translation as lands of peace and harmony, forgetting that they remain structured by various kinds of socioeconomic deprivation. So a middle way between these two pitfalls will remain attentive both to the possibilities of relationality and the socioeconomic realities where such relationality has been reinforced, rejected, or recalibrated. And that is my talk for today.